Good morning and welcome to the Southeast Comprehensive Center's Equity Summit. Accountable leadership, opportunities for equitable systems. For those of you that don't know me, I am Beth Howard-Brown. I serve as director of the Southeast Comprehensive Center. I got an opportunity to meet many of you on last evening, and I hope you enjoyed yourself as much as I did. Before we get started, I'd like for us to take a moment of silence and remember the families and children that have been impacted by the natural disasters that have taken place across our nation, in the Southeast especially with the various hurricanes and storms that our citizens are still recovering from, and also the wildfires in California. So we can have a moment of silence, please. Thank you. Please know that we are working in many of the states that are recovering still in the Southeast, and we continue to keep those families in our prayers and thoughts. The hope is that this summit will allow one the opportunity to take stock of the conditions, practices, and policies within our states and local contexts that call our attention to equity as a moral imperative. For some of us, these conversations began with pre-summit activities. Maybe you participated in the civil rights journey, which started on last Sunday. Or possibly you visited the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians. Or maybe you attended and toured the Civil Rights Museum and the Mississippi Museum of History. And last night, we had an opportunity to hear about Jackson State and the historical perspective they have brought to the civil rights movement. All powerful activities that brought about and required us to take a moment to think, to pause, and consider how we're working to serve the children of our states. And also, think back about historically how they've been affected by our actions, policies, and conditions that still exist. As many of you know, on May 17, 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned the idea of separate but equal public schools in the landmark Brown versus the Board of Education, The decision called for the desegregation of schools and was a major catalyst of the civil rights movement, with Rosa Parks' arrest occurring a year later. But decades later, racial inequities still exist with the nation's education system. The U.S. News and World Report determined which states have the smallest gap, which is calculated by dividing the minority bachelor's degree rate by the majority's rate for each state. Let me share a little bit of that data. I was up early this morning looking at that, and I was just amazed at what I found. About the racial gap in Missouri, they ranked number 10. I'm going to only give you a couple of them, and then I'm going to talk about us as states. Missouri's racial gap was 20.4%. About 29% of non-Hispanic whites in Missouri have a bachelor's degree or higher, compared to 20% of all other racial groups. Tennessee ranked number 9. Their racial education gap was 19.8%. And the South, and in the Southeast, has the second lowest education gap by race of any region, following the Great Lakes. Michigan was number 8, with a racial education gap of 19.1%. In Michigan, 29% of non-Hispanic whites hold a bachelor's degree or higher, while nearly 24% of minorities hold the same level of education. Number 7 was Washington State, with a racial gap of 16.6. I give you Washington State because Washington is one of a few states to place in the top 10 for both equality in education by race and for its higher education system, in the 2018 Best State Rankings. It has one of the highest rates of educational attainment and one of the highest four-year college graduation rates. Now for our states. North Carolina was listed as number 25. Georgia, number 31. South Carolina, number 36. Texas, number 39. Alabama, 44. And Mississippi, 47. I share this data to assist in grounding our thinking. Now, Dr. Johnson will come up in a few minutes and he will share much more as it relates to what the data tells us and what the outcomes will look like. The whole idea of the summit is to ground you as it relates to equity-related understandings, plans, and actions in local, intermediate, and historical realities. All of this linked to human rights and civil rights. It also serves as an opportunity to engage in conversations, to talk with other stakeholders, and discuss in a critical review the actual interpretation of education data, and particularly with regard to persistent education gaps among student groups. The hope is that this will be achieved by an examination of these patterns and trends based upon our geographic locations, our equity strengths, because we do have strengths, and also we have challenges. I ask you to take a moment and truly open your eyes to the issues brought forth in this summit and use it as a foundation to plan and work towards helping improve education for our children. Thank you.
This, the 2018 Summit, Accountable Leadership, Opportunities for Equitable Systems, is an auspicious occasion, one with great promise and greater possibility. As we embarked upon the experiences of our pre-summit activities and plan for the summit, we were mindful about offering you an opportunity to refresh your equity-related understandings. We wanted you to do that within the context of the local, immediate, and historic realities of human rights and civil rights. Sometimes we think about human rights and civil rights as almost the same. So when we think about human rights, we know that those are the ones that come to us just by nature of the fact that we're human beings. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. We think about civil rights, we know that those come by virtue of legal manifestations. And so we were able to see, and by a show of hands, how many of you were able to participate in the pre-summit activities? So in those pre-summit activities, we were able to see both at play, human rights and civil rights, and the challenge of both at play, impediments and barriers that have existed over time to those rights. And so what we want and hope to achieve through those pre-summit activities was really kind of to get you revved up for the rest of this next 2 days. We wanted you to tap into the very essence of what it means for you to be an educator and to think about why you pursued education in the first place. We wanted you to think about the social and moral responsibility attached to being an educator in this field and a leader in this field. As education leaders, we are accountable for our systems of education and for those served or underserved by them. When we look at what our systems have wrought, we must ask and act upon the question, what does accountable leadership necessitate in the way of actions and outcomes? When we think about that question, I want us to turn to two different focus or sets of foci, self and system. When you think about yourself, I want you to ask yourself these questions as you take stock of our performance as equity leaders in education. Ask yourself this, and just answer it silently. You might jot it down on paper. How do I identify? Are there aspects of your identity that you like to highlight among others? Are those that you like to mute? Which ones do you mute? And where did you learn to mute those aspects of your identity? Which aspects of your identity advantage you? And which put you at a disadvantage? What assumptions do you hold regarding yourself and others based on cultural and racial identities? How do these assumptions affect your interactions with others and your decisions that resonate with and against sometimes our education stakeholders? How do they influence your decision-making personally and professionally? And finally, based on your decisions, what is your impact on equity? What is your impact on equity? What would you have it be? Are the answers the same? I hope not. And so I challenge each of you to be mindful, to be invested in furthering equity in a way that you have not before. Over these next 2 days, we will have an opportunity to hear from experts, researchers, practitioners, stakeholders across the education continuum. We'll have a chance to look deeply at trends in national data that reflect severe inequities and persistent inequities. We'll have a chance to kind of drill down to more local data that enables us to look at neighborhoods and communities and schools to see where the most vulnerable stakeholders seem to exist in terms of the volume of inequities in which they're surrounded by. And I want you over these days to think about our education system. We know that as far back as 1965 with ESEA, we were looking to ensure that students had more equitable outcomes, particularly students who were from homes of poverty. In 1975, we looked at IDEA, trying to provide students with disabilities greater supports. We had mandates in 2002, No Child Left Behind. We had Race to the Top and School Improvement Grants in 2009. The ESEA Flex waivers in 2012. Excellent Education for All in 2014. ESSA in 2015, and we're still working to refine our ESSA work. And so over 5 decades, we've been trying to get it right. The students who were underserved 5 decades ago remain underserved. If we are accountable leaders, we must do better. It is a moral imperative. When we ask ourselves what the impetus was for those 5 decades of national mandates, what is our answer? It's the same as it is today. And we know the answer. It's all about providing equitable opportunities. Some of what we observe in terms of opportunity is really definitely linked to what we observe in terms of achievement. We focus on achievement gaps, and in doing so, we often put the onus on the learner. We put the onus on the teacher. We put the onus on the parents, on the community, on the neighborhoods. But we don't look at the systems in which those things operate. We don't ask ourselves how we're doing as education leaders to provide equitable access to opportunities to those students, well, all students, but particularly those who we've been leaving behind for at least 5 decades. So what would it mean if we provided equitable opportunities? We might arrive at more equal outcomes. I want us to think about the current system in which we operate. And I want you to ask yourself, who benefits from this system? Who accrues benefits? Even the benefits accrued are faulty. Because for those who do not accrue benefits, the repercussions and the consequences impact even those that do accrue benefits. Our lives, our futures are intertwined in ways that we will never be able to unravel. What outcomes are being produced within the context of ongoing inequity? As a leader, for what part of that challenge are you accountable? I like this quote by John Dewey, who says, "What the best and wisest parent wants for his child, that must be all we want for all the children of the community. Anything less is unlovely, and left unchecked destroys our democracy." You know, John Dewey said that in 1967. Here we are in 2018. We have a lot of unloveliness to look upon. But I ask you to think about this equity leadership. What is it? It is leadership that anticipates and acts strategically to address the needs of all education stakeholders, particularly those of greatest unmet need. And it develops a culture that advances individuals in their collective growth, knowledge, skill development, and in empowerment, self-empowerment. It enables the capacity to recognize and value the undervalued, to appreciate as assets those things that have been misunderstood as deficits. Equity leadership is a moral imperative. Daryl Wing Sue, in a PBS NewsHour in 2015, made the statement: "When you look at the disparities and inequalities we have in education, employment, and healthcare, it is not due to overly racist or white supremacists. It is due to the well-intentioned teachers who educate our children, employers who decide who to hire, who to retain, and who to promote. It is those individuals who are unaware of their hidden biases that are having a major impact on our standard of living." Education is really about our standard of living. We are striving to be better educators and to be better educated so that we may have a better quality of life. We are not learning and reading for the sake of it, for the joy of it, although it is joyful, without linking it to life outcomes, without linking it to life opportunities, without linking it to creating a better world. It's really void. And so I'll leave you with this. What you touch as a leader, you change. And what you change, changes you. To be an effective leader is to be an active learner, open to hearing the perspectives of others, to entertaining unlikely curiosities, to questioning long-standing norms, to challenging things accepted uncritically, to enduring and examining challenge, to searching oneself for strength and limitations alike, and to applying learnings from those examinations generously to self. Often we want to apply our learnings to others, but if we could start with self, we would be so much further along. When we start with self, we get a chance to see what we are bringing and what that contribution is to the larger society, and whether it's sufficient. And I think we know that we can all do better. Such a leader must be courageous enough to fertilize and nurture kernels of wisdom acquired along the way, and to allow them to sprout new, different, unfamiliar insight that change us all together. Change our current practices, that change our expectations and aspirations. And as much as a leader's vision must be adjusted to encompass her or his blind spots, if neglected, those same blind spots can impede the very best accomplishments yet to be seen. So I ask us to begin with self, examine our blind spots, examine the contributions we're making, examine the assumptions we hold about ourselves and others, and ask ourselves repeatedly as we look at our data, as we look at those around us, as we think about our interactions, who's being engaged, who is benefiting from this exchange, who's not being engaged, who's not allowed the benefit of this engagement, and make some actions toward changing that. Tomorrow, we will have an opportunity to complete, before we leave, an accountability plan that's based on courageous collective ambition. I want us to muster up all the courage we can today and begin to apply it across these 2 days. And whatever we apply and find present in the plan, I'd like you to commit to implement. We will ask our national collaborators to support us in that implementation, and the Southeast Comp Center staff will continue to support you in that implementation following the summit. And so we're with you, we're for you, and we hope you'll join us. Have a good evening.
I had an opportunity to meet this young man a couple of months ago at the Education Commission on States conference, and he spoke for about 45 minutes, room full of policymakers, governors, a couple of teachers were in the room, and other stakeholders. And he held our attention the entire time. It was almost as if people were afraid to breathe because they were afraid they were going to miss something. And the data he shared built the case for me to say, we have to think about something different. And those were the conversations I had throughout that day. He has an extensive bio, and I'm going to just highlight some pieces from it. But one of the pieces that stood out to me is that he was listed and selected by Fast Company magazine as one of the 17 brightest thinkers and doers in the new world of work. His current research and consulting activities focus on workforce and workplace implications of post-1990 demographic changes in the United States. We had a conversation this morning about those changing demographics and the impact it will have on us and on our states. And just a powerful 3 minutes. And I know that in the next 30, 40 minutes, you'll be just as engaged and shocked and maybe a little angry, and it's okay. But know that Dr. Johnson has the data to support all that he's sharing during this time. I welcome him. I'm glad that he's here with us on today, and we truly appreciate the time, Dr. Johnson. Please join me in giving a round of applause to Dr. James.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to be with you this morning. And I want to begin by thanking all of you for the work that you do on behalf of the children of our country. Ladies and gentlemen, there's nothing more important than the work that you do on a daily basis. We are in a war, and I'm not talking about the war on terrorism. I'm talking about the war for talent. And it is incumbent upon us to develop the next generation of talent to propel our nation in an economy, society, and world where the new normal is certain and uncertain. The only thing that you can count on today is certain uncertainty. And the question becomes, what do I need in my toolkit to weather certain uncertainty? Employers tell us that they want workers who can groove on ambiguity, because that's the nature of the landscape. It's foggy out there, and they're looking for talented people who can peer through the fog and identify the propitious opportunities and avoid the landmines in an economy and society where the new normal is certain uncertainty. Having said that, our nation, really the world, but our nation, every region and every city, including every community in this room represented in the midst of an unprecedented demographic transformation. The kinds of changes we find ourselves in the midst of, we're going to have to buckle your seatbelt to deal with them. And if you ignore them at your own peril. Lots of things we can debate today politically. I want to suggest to you that basic demography is not one of them. I assure you, if you're 5 years old today, 5 years from now, you're going to be 10 years old. The birthday comes at the same time every year. You just add 1 to what it was last year, and voila, you got it. In fact, every year, my annual review with my dean, I walk in, I come out with a big raise. So I walk in and say, you know, when we met last year, I was 63 years old. You know what? I'm 64 now, and next year when we meet, I'm going to be 65. It's called forecasting. I'm the best at it. The kind of changes we find ourselves in the midst of, we call them disruptive demographic changes because they're going to dramatically transform all of our social, economic, and political institutions. They're going to transform the workforce. They're going to transform the workplace. They're going to transform consumer markets, and they're going to transform the business of K-12 and higher education. And in the time allotted me, I want to talk about what those disruptive changes are. I want to talk about what trends are, where I see challenges and opportunities for us. And then I want to talk about the notion of the implications for K-12 education. And I want to frame this notion. I think we got to change the debate, folks. Nobody's moved by social and moral appeals today. Let's be sure that the bottom line is, at the end of the day, we have to make the case that investing in kids of color moving forward is a competitiveness issue in our society. We're going to lose our shirt in the global marketplace if we leave this child population of kids behind. At the end of the day, they're the next generation that has to do the good work of maintaining our competitiveness and how about the global economy of the 21st century. So competitiveness is one of the lenses I'm bringing to. I'm going to be making the demographic case data-wise based on several sources of data. One source is the decennial census. You know, every 10 years we conduct full enumeration of our population. The last one was in 2010. How many of you completed the 2010 census form? Don't lie, I got your eyes red. If you remember the form, it was 1 page front and back. Depending on the number of crumb snatches you had in your household, it took between about 10 seconds and about 15 seconds to finish that thing. Radically different from earlier censuses, because in the earlier censuses, there was something called the census long form. And the emphasis was really on long, because you needed breakfast, you needed lunch, you needed dinner, and about 3 stiff drinks to finish that thing. They want to know about your firstborn, your lastborn, the one you don't own up to, everything in your life, they want to know in that census long form. We don't do the census long form in the decennial census anymore because we have a different way of collecting data, a new way called the American Community Survey. That is, in essence, that census long form. But the beauty of the American Community Survey is it is administered to a representative sample of the population on an annual basis, not every 10 years. So we no longer wait 10 years to figure out what's going on. So for our purposes today, I'm going to be relying on 2 decennial censuses, the 2000 and the 2010, and the American Community Survey from 2010 to 2017 to give you the snapshot. Let me put a pin right there and let me say something to you that you need to pay attention to. The 2020 census is about to be enumerated. Understand that that citizenship question is not to be taken lightly. You know, you should know if you don't, that everything is tied to those numbers. Yes. And so every time we do anything that jeopardizes the quality of the census, it jeopardizes your ability to pursue the very theme that we're talking about here today, because everything is tied to those numbers. There are some people who believe the census ought to be taken on the back of a matchbook. But the only thing we want is a count. We don't care about your race, your gender, or anything. There are other people who say it should be eliminated altogether. We all got to do is pay attention to social media and figure out what's going on in society. So understand that this is not trivial, the 2020 census. It is a very, very important undertaking, and tell everybody early and often that finish and complete a census form, you do things. 6 trends. We'll talk on list them, and then we'll talk about each one of them really quickly here. The South rises again. The browning of America. third one is marrying out is in. The fourth one is the silver tsunami is about to hit. The fifth one, the end of men. I didn't make it up. It's actually the title of a book by a writer from the Atlantic magazine called, her name's Hannah Rosen. She received publication of the book, 2 articles in the magazine, and right time to read the book. The first one was by that title, the second one called Boys on the Side. You'll become apparent what I'm talking about in just a minute. My last one is Cool Little Water from Grandma's Well. I know there's somebody in this room that knows what that is. All right, it's a song. I'm not going to sing it for you, but let me tell you what it's called. Cool Little Water from Grandma's Well and Grandpa's Too. Let's talk about each one of these things. People on the move, the South rise again is about the southern United States as defined by the Census Bureau. Those states in red. If you know your history, and I'm sure you do, you know that for much of the certainly much of the 20th century, this was an economically backward region. Had all kinds of economic problems, had all kinds of racial problems. It was the place to leave as opposed to the place to be or to come to. I actually grew up in North Carolina, and I went to high school, and I actually went to high school in 1968, which means that for the first 8 years of my education, I attended racially segregated schools, and I actually remember reading books handed down from the white schools, and because I could read, I could see that they didn't have nice things written in the margins of them and the like. And but that was a South at the time. And I remember my freshman year in high school, before it fully integrated, I was an athlete. Let's just say I was on the team. And I remember my first football game was an away game. And I remember quite vividly, as if it were yesterday, that when we arrived at the stadium, the KKK was marching outside the stadium, daring us to beat the opposing team. We beat them so bad they couldn't spell KKK. That was the South at the time, you know, eggs on our bus and things of that nature. I couldn't wait to get out of the South when I graduated from college, 1975. I said, I'm out of here and I'm never coming back. If you look at the data, you see something interesting. What you will note is that from about 1910 to about 1970, the South only captured, far right column, about 30% of net national population growth. Of all the growth occurring in our country, about 30% of it was concentrated in the South. Why? More people leaving the region than coming. To the extent that the South was growing, it was in excess of birth over death. And then something profound occurred. Ladies and gentlemen, every decade since 1970, the South has captured about half of net national population growth in this country. We've gone from a region where we speak 2 languages, English and bad English, to one that they can speak over 300 different languages. We've become the cat's meow demographically. In the first decade of the new millennium, we had about 27 million people to our population, 14.3 million of them concentrated in the South. You will note that the second most rapid growing region was the West region of the country. Profound redistribution of population from the Northeast and the Midwest to the West and the South. A share of that growth was 53% in the South of all that growth. What's going on? It's all about migration and it's all about immigration, ladies and gentlemen. Look at the South. The only region between 2000 and 2008 where everybody was moving to in larger numbers that were leaving. You talk about all migrants, you talk about African Americans, you talk about Hispanic, Latino, Latinx population, you talk about the elderly, the foreign-born, everybody headed south in larger numbers. That wasn't true about the West region. The West was losing Hispanics. The West was losing the elderly population. It went to the Midwest during this period. The only group moving there, larger ones that were leaving, were the elderly. This is the news flash. I was there last week. After this cold snap, they're going to be the heck out there. And the Northeast is kind of like when the last person leaves, please turn off the lights. I don't know about here in Mississippi, but I can tell you in North Carolina, all you got to do is pay attention to license tags. Not when you're driving, when you're in the parking lot, you see all of these people, those snowbirds headed what? South. Now some of them, the thing you have to understand, that there was a time when most of the snowbirds went to Florida. But a lot of them got down there and found out it seemed like all the time. Came back, stopped in North Carolina, called halfbacks, and halfway back to New York. The population. Recession, the question becomes, well, what did the Great Recession do to these trends that we're talking about? The upper left-hand corner, the answer is a slowdown in the magnitude of movement, not a change in the directionality of the movement. Gain of about 655,000 people before the Great Recession. During the Great Recession, it dropped down for the South to about 397,000 people. So look at Florida. Florida actually flipped during the Great Recession. Always been a migration magnet. Why would Florida flip during the Great Recession? Well, lots of people with nice retirement portfolios that moved to Florida. What happened to their retirement portfolios? They went further south. And I'm telling you that they are back in the workplace. They're called the newly unretired. And then there are people who age to the level where they need caregiving support. What did their caregivers say? We're not coming there. You have to come to where we are. Profound. What my point is, understand, I'm talking about long-term population shifts, but understand they can be interrupted by shifts in the business cycle and the like. Obviously, Florida is back in the light to being a migration magnet. International migration, we've been pretty draconian on international migrants since 9/11 and becoming more draconian. I'm just going to suggest to you that's not a good thing for us. It's actually bad for us, and I'll make a case for that in just a moment. But I lied to you. I said it's the South, ladies and gentlemen. It's really not the South. This movement is about 4 states in the South. This movement is about Texas. It's about Florida. It's about Georgia and North Carolina. That 14.3 million people, about 71% of it was concentrated in those 4 states in terms of driving growth. And so it's a highly, doesn't mean the other southern states too are growing. It means that they're not growing like those states. Those are the migration magnet states, if you will, in terms of the kind of changes we're talking about. Well, since 2010 to 2017, we've added another 16 or 17 million people to our population in this country. 9.1 million of them concentrated in the South, about 5.2 million out west. It's this profound redistribution of population concentrated in the West and the South, and tag, we're it. There's something called, the GIS people in the room will appreciate this, there's something called the geographic centroid of our population, and if you follow and track the history of the centroid, it has been moving from the Midwest to the Southwest. Today, the geographic centroid is in rural Missouri. I'm predicting by 2020 it's going to be in Mexico. Y'all will have to see if I'm right in the kinds of changes that we find ourselves in 2020. The only change since 2010 is it's no longer just Texas, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina. You have to add Virginia to the mix because the Beltway is around DC is growing really, really rapidly. About 80% of the South's growth is highly concentrated in those places in terms of kinds of changes that we're talking about. Only about 22% of that net growth in the other southern states combined. At the same time that we have this profound redistribution of population where South is the growth magnet, and those states in particular, the racial and ethnic complexion of our population is changing dramatically, and the age structure is changing. And undergirding those changes are 2 colorful processes, what I call the browning of America and the graying of America, and both of them are occurring simultaneously. Let's talk about the browning of America first. This is about immigration-driven population change. To give you some sense of what I mean, to contextualize the browning, I'm going to do a quick immigration history for you, beginning at the turn of this century and moving forward. These are cartograms where we've exaggerated the size and shapes of foreign countries proportional to the number of legal immigrants we've invited to America. Everybody say legal. Legal. Okay? Because I know people get outside of shape when you start talking about illegal immigration. Hold your body just a minute. We'll get there shortly. This is legal immigration. 3 graphics, 1921 to 1960, 61 to 86, 87 to 98. Focus, if you will, on the top down of that graphic. What you will notice is that most of the legal immigrants that arrived in America between 1921 and 1960 originated where? In Europe. Relatively few originated where? In Asian countries, and a small share in Latin America compared to Europe, right? Ladies and gentlemen, that was an intentional immigration pattern because in the mid-1960s we had an immigration law in this country that said if we were going to allow a foreign-born to enter our country, it was important that they not upset the existing racial and ethnic balance of our country as it existed at the turn of the 20th century. So we had expressed preference for people who were phenotypically similar to Anglo-Saxons. People who come to America, learn to speak English, and anglicize their names, and voila, this thing called melting pot was supposed to work. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, we operated on a quota system that was geographically discriminatory against certain people of the world. In fact, if you go back to the 1880s and look at our immigration history, what you will recognize is something called the Chinese exclusion law. They shouldn't be allowed to come to America because it would be
quote-unquote difficult to assimilate into mainstream society. Fast forward to the first decade of the 20th century, we defined what became known as the Asiatic Barrier Region, that included Japan. Shouldn't be allowed to come to America because it would be, quote-unquote, difficult to assimilate to mainstream society. We justified all of that based on a series of racist theories about cultural inferiority. So we control the composition of our population through our immigration law. Fast forward to the middle panel of this graphic, though, you begin to see something interesting occur. What you will notice in that middle panel, immigration from Europe shrinks. What begins to grow in the middle period there? You see Asia growing greater for us, and Latin America. How did that come about? It came about, ladies and gentlemen, coincident with the civil rights movement in domestic life. We liberalized our immigration law in 1965 via something called the Hart-Celler Act of that year. Put a pin in it because it's one of the most profound pieces of legislation in our history. What did it do? It eliminated those discriminatory provisions based on geographic origin, opening up the doors of our country to large numbers of people who heretofore had not been allowed to enter. This piece of legislation is so important, we use 1965 as the dividing line to distinguish two groups of immigrants in America. Anybody arrived prior to 1965, we call them the old immigrants, and we refer to them further as the invisible minorities. Why invisible? Phenotypically similar to the Anglo-Saxon model. You anglicize your name, you learn to speak English, all that stuff. It becomes difficult to distinguish where you're from. Anybody arriving since 1965, we refer to as the new immigrants, and further as the visible minorities. Why? They're from radically different regions of the world. Their phenotype is different. Yes, they can go through the assimilation process, but you will always know that they're different because their phenotype is different from the old model. Fast forward to the third panel of this graphic. What you will notice is that immigration from Europe almost disappears. It looks a lot like immigration from Asia in the earlier initial period on this graphic. Ladies and gentlemen, since 1965, and coincident with, at the impetus of the Hart-Celler Act, we've seen this profound shift in the origins of immigrants, profound shift in the phenotype of immigrants arriving, and takeaway number 3, the numbers changed dramatically across those time periods. Left-hand side, between 1920 and 1961, we only allowed about 206,000 legal immigrants to enter our country on an annual basis. You will note between the 60s and early 90s, it increased to about 561,000 annually, early 90s to the late 90s, 800 to the early 2000s, in the 800,000, 800, close to 900,000 range. 2005 to 2012, 1 million to 1.1 million legal permanent residents entering our country, all contributing to the growing diversity of our population, primarily from Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. These are people of color, ladies and gentlemen. You will note that the numbers are headed down. If the current administration has its way, we're going to cut our 1/2 legal immigration into this country. We're headed that direction already. Again, I'm going to suggest to you that's not a good thing. I'll tell you why in just a moment. At the same time, in the early 1960s, we liberalized our immigration law. We acknowledged for the first time that we were a nation of immigrants, and thus we said people who were being persecuted in their homelands for economic, political, religious reasons, that they too should be allowed to come. Refugees, parolees, asylees, those numbers have fluctuated over time depending upon our orientation and predisposition to allow them to enter. Hotly contested issue today, but whenever those people have arrived in our country, they have contributed to the growing diversity of our population. So when we start talking about immigration, we've got a mixture of folk through legal channels that enter our country. But if you looked at the refugee issue, a hotly contested issue today, these are the origin countries for refugees entering our country, mostly people of color, hotly contested kind of issue. And if you look at the issue of Central American refugees and the like, 1,100% increase in asylum applications over the last 5 or 6 years, 294,000 asylum seekers in 2017 alone. And you know the zero tolerance policy, turn on TV, you got all these issues today. These are mostly people of color escaping all kinds of persecution and the like, or at risk of their lives in doing things. But it's when people start, that's the law, that's the way it is. We're screwing around the law today, yes. But it's when you start talking about illegal immigration, when people really get body parts out of shape. Now, illegal immigration wasn't much of a problem in America prior to 1965 for two reasons: the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. You ever made it Since 1965, we got a fundamental shift in geographic origin, and the southern border has been relatively flexible in terms of the flow. So this notion of illegal immigration will assume greater importance. How much? 300,000 to 400,000 annually the past couple of decades. This current interest about illegal immigration is not new. It was a highly contested issue in the 90s, in the 80s and 90s. I was on the faculty at UCLA in California. At that time, lots of discussions about we got too many illegal immigrants in America. We need to do something to stem the tide. At that time, the federal government says, well, maybe if we saturate labor demand, if we fill every job in our economy, there will be no reason for anybody to come because there won't be any work to do. How do we propose to fill every job in our economy? Via something called the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. We said that any person who was in America unauthorized, illegal, or undocumented, that if you've been here illegally, you can document that you've been here illegally since before 1982, we will grant you amnesty, no questions asked. Okay? Well, how do you document that you've been here illegally since before 1982? Well, you got a rent receipt, a closing bill, a greasy receipt from Burger King's at Bart before 1982. Amnesty. How many people came forward except the federal government's offer of amnesty? About 3 million people came forward to accept the federal government's offer of amnesty, all contributing to the growing diversity of our population. But understand the numbers as a function of that legislation were actually bigger than that, because what the law says is that once you accept amnesty, you pay family members, you get a family provision of the law, so it had a bigger impact. But what we know is that there were about 2.7 million people here illegally who didn't trust the federal government enough to come forward and accept amnesty. I ain't going for the okey-doke, not going to identify me in the point. And they stayed. So by 1996, we estimate that there were about 5 million illegal immigrants in the country. If you follow the debate since 2005, that numbers range wildly between 7 million and about 15 million people. And I can tell you as a business demographer, I've probably averaged 3 to 5 calls a month over the last several years from the media asking me how many illegal immigrants there are in America. And you know, the numbers to be good, stay up all night, figuring, blaze a path to the restroom, to get on an airplane, come to here, talk like this person, and you do is ask the flight attendant for a napkin so you can figure, so you don't want to, you don't want your numbers to be off. And I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I finally figured out the only person getting old and ugly in this process was me. So whenever they call me now and ask me about how many illegal immigrants in America, I just say a lot. The real number is about 11 million people. Okay? Now, when you hear this debate about illegal, unauthorized, undocumented immigration, what group becomes a poster child? Who are we talking about? Mexicans. Usually some person of Mexican descent surreptitiously crossing their brain, right? I want to suggest you it's a little bit more complicated than that. But to get you to understand the complication, I got to confuse you a little bit, but it's not me doing it, it's actually the way the numbers are. Are you all aware that there are a group of immigrants in America called non-immigrants? You're aware that there are a group of immigrants called non-immigrants. I know y'all saying, what is he drinking? Non-immigrants are people we invite to America on a temporary basis. They enter America on visas. There are about 68 different categories of these folks. Tourists, foreign diplomats, international students, and international baseball players all enter America on temporary visas. Ladies and gentlemen, if you enter America on a 90-day tourist visa and you stay 91 days, what are you? No, you'll call a visa overstay. Ladies and gentlemen, 40 to 45% of the illegal immigrants in America walk through the door with papers from the federal government. When it's time to go home, what do they do? Stay. Remember the terrorists of 9/11? 6 of them were here with temporary visas that had not expired. 3 of them fit the visa overstay category. When it's time to go home, they just blew us off. Another 6, we don't know how the heck they got here. And the last one came on a student visa, was supposed to go to California to learn to speak and read English, but instead went to flight school in Florida. And we now know after the fact, flight school was a bit dubious of this guy because of his poor facility in English. So they reported him to the immigration service. fellow aviation administrator. Anybody that was listening, we got this guy, you know, he's going to be a pilot, but he can't speak English well enough. The guy couldn't speak English well enough to tell flight school he had no interest in learning how to land planes, only to fly. Why don't you hear much about this population? Well, it's big business for us. Look, the numbers grew from about 11.8 million in 1981, right before 9/11 in 2000, 32.8 million people entering on temporary visas. The numbers went down a little bit after 9/11. You see, they're back up. What? Tourists spend $3,000 to $5,000 per visit. International students contribute $12.8 billion to our economy annually. Why? They pay 10 to 15% higher than out-of-state tuition, and they have to pay the full freight and cost of living while they're here. And please don't tell me an international baseball player is a low-wage worker. You get nothing out of what I have to say to you today. Understand that we're not having an honest discussion about illegal immigration. We have allowed one particular group to be persecuted. If you worry about homeland security, probably not the poor Mexican immigrant who wants to work hard, take care of their kids, sitting at home, and all that kind of stuff. Probably these folks. You know what? They come from all over the world. Please don't be offended by what I'm about to say, but they look a lot like y'all. In fact, I don't know who's illegal in here, and we'll find out. And they could be sitting beside you in some of the most sensitive areas of our economy, and you not know it. Ladies and gentlemen, building a wall around your country won't solve this one because a lot of them are plans. Understand the dynamic. Don't fall for the okey-doke in terms of all the kinds of things we're talking about. My more general statement, we kept immigration pretty low in the mid-1960s. You see that huge takeoff, about 43, 44 million people who are foreign-born. Who are they? Yes, about 46% of them are Hispanic. You'll note the second largest group are Asian descent. Only about 18% of them are non-Hispanic white. If you looked at those numbers prior to 1965, that would have been what? Flipped. It would have been the reverse in terms of the kinds of changes. When I start talking about the browning of America, I'm talking about the source of the growth and where it's coming from. And so the reason I asked you, did you complete your 2010 census form, is because that census form asked you to self-identify. There was a couple questions. Are you Hispanic? If you say I'm Hispanic, you check that box. And then it says, well, if you're not Hispanic, you check the non-Hispanic box, but then they have a follow-up question. So well, if you're non-Hispanic what? Are you non-Hispanic white, black, American, Indian, Alaska, Native, Asian, Native white, Pacific Island, or you are two or more race person? I've already told you we have about 27 million people to our population. During the first decade of the new millennium, you will note that the last row, third column, 15.2 million of that 27 million people were Hispanic, on the rate of 43%. You will note that above the yellow line at the top, the non-Hispanic population grew by 12.2 million or 4.9%. But the number I want to draw your attention to is the growth in the non-Hispanic white population. It grew by 2.3 million or 1.2%. Everybody between those two yellow lines and inclusive of the last yellow line are people of color, and you will note double-digit growth in everybody but American Indian, Alaska Native. That's 9%. That's close enough for government work as far as I'm concerned. Where is your growth coming from? It's coming from people of color, and that's what I mean by the browning of America, the changes in our population. Of that 27 million people, what percentage of it was non-white? About 92% of it, and about 55% of it was Hispanic. Here in the South, it was about 80% and 46% respectively. That 14.3 million, you can read the numbers for the migration magnet state. When I talk about the browning of America, that's what I'm talking about. Move forward to 2010, 2017. At 17 million people, 91% of it non-white, about 50% of it Hispanic. Talk about this change, that's what I'm talking about, where your source of growth is coming from. This is so important to our future, ladies and gentlemen, because what you have to understand is that migration and immigration are age-selective processes. What does that mean? It means far more young people migrate and immigrate than old people. That means old people don't move, they move slower and at a lower propensity. There's one more piece to this story. Please don't repeat this anywhere. Y'all can get put out of the equity business, and I'm not going to be a part of that. Young people are more likely to have children than old folks. Put those two things together, age selectivity, people coming in, higher fertility rates, it has an impact on the age structure in your community. Okay. So the median age of the U.S. population in 2014 was about 38 years old. Half of us older than that, half of us younger than that. Okay? What's the median age of a Hispanic? Last row.
29.
28 years, yeah, 29 years old. How many of y'all heard in the anti-illegal immigration debate or immigration debate that Hispanics are burdened on the healthcare system in America? What kind of major health problems you have? The median age is 28. Now, before you answer that question, somebody tell me what the median age of a white non-Hispanic is in America. 43 years old. Ladies and gentlemen, when you're in your 20s, what kind of health problems you have? They're usually acute. You got stick your finger in the lawnmower, you gotta get it glued back on. When you move from your 20s to your 40s, your health conditions move from acute to what? Chronic. Which one costs the most?
Chronic.
Trust me, I shall have lost my wife to cancer at 48 years old. I treated for the last 6 months of life $5,000 a week. Ladies and gentlemen, a lot of stuff you hear makes no sense. These are young people that we're going to need to propel our nation moving forward. And we are an aging nation without it. One more piece of the story. This is for the ladies in the room. You tell the guys to close their ears, but I really think they need to hear this. Ladies and gentlemen, ladies, there's something in demography called completed fertility. Okay? I won't give you the big theory today. You want that, come to chapel here, pay us a couple $100,000 a year, I'll tell you early and often. Let me give you the pop version. Ladies, completed fertility is when you tell your husband or your boo, go take out the trash, ain't nothing else happening here. Completed fertility for women occurs between the ages of 40 and 44. There's a precipitous drop in fertility about that time. What's the median age of a white, non-Hispanic female in America? Last row, last column, third line, third row.
29.
42 years old. What's the median age of a Hispanic? Last row.
29.
Now, between those two lines are all women of color. You will note a 10 to 20 year gap in the median ages. They are 10 to 20 years younger. Where's your growth going to come from? Where's your growth? Now, I don't know that some of y'all in your 40s come out, I'm going to go home and fix this tonight. What I would say is, with the condition of your conference organizer, leave now. Take your time to get home. You might go home and squeeze out one, but you're not going to do what a 29 is. This is fundamental biology, ladies and gentlemen. You think about it. You build a wall around your country and send all the young folk home. What you got left? The big gay crowd. Understand the dynamics. You got to connect the dots here, ladies and gentlemen. This is a competitiveness issue for us because this is the next generation of talent that has to propel our nation because otherwise we're aging. We see the impact in births. In 1990, 66% of all births in America were non-Hispanic whites. That dropped to 50%. 2008, for the first time in history, non-Hispanic white births dropped below 50%. It's unlikely to go the other way because of the dynamics and aging and a number of other things. We're talking about a heck of a color adjustment. In 2005, 67% of U.S. population was non-Hispanic white. 10 years earlier, it was about 74%. We now think by 2050, the non-Hispanic white share will drop below 50%, or around 47%. We'll talk about brown Americans, where that source of growth is going to come from, and change the complexion of our society. Further adding to the complexity and the browning of America is a profound shift in marriage patterns. Marrying out is in is about who you marry. You know, it was illegal for even blacks and whites to marry in the late 1960s. That all got eliminated, but this is not about black-white marriages, but rather it's about a more profound shift in marriages. The out-marriage rate means you marry someone of different racial ethnicity than you belong to. Among newly married couples, doubled from about 7% of all marriages to about 15% between 1980 and 2008, and it increased from 3% to about 8% among currently married people, marrying someone of a different racial and ethnic group than they belong to. Who's doing all this strange hooking up in strange ways? Now, 41% of those marriages are between Hispanics and whites. About 15% of them are between Asians and whites, and 16% of the cases, both marriage partners are non-white, black and Asian, Asian or Latino and the like. Note that the black-white relationships are the smallest share. There's this group called Other. I don't know who the heck they are. What's the most significant thing here? Ladies and gentlemen, the second most the Hispanic, Latino, Latinx population is people who self-identify as two or more races. What does this mean? That a lot of the kids that walk in your school door now and moving forward won't fit into the nice and neat little racial categories we was accustomed to putting them in, and they won't allow them to put them in those things. It has enormous implications for curriculum and a whole range of other things out there that we must be mindful of. That part of grounding is this increasing blending. You can now, I think the private sector has probably got us one up in this matter. Anybody remember the Cheerios commercial from the Super Bowl a couple of years ago? Black guy lying on a couch, asleep. His little daughter rushes up and dumps Cheerios on his chest. And it's clear this little girl is what? Mixed race. And then the camera shifts from the little girl to what? The mother. And the mother is what? White. Oh, Twitter went crazy. How dare you air your dirty laundry during the Super Bowl? And the company wasn't that upset about it. So much so that the next year they had another commercial with the same family. The woman pregnant again. So they say, get over it. This is America. If you pay attention close to the commercials on TV today, you see a lot more of these interracial couples. It's a sign of things to come. It's going to have enormous implications for the schools. At the same time, all of that is occurring. We are aging as a nation. Now, Browning is about immigrants, people who are changing the complexion of our society. Aging, the grading of America is about the aging of our native-born population, and in particular, our native-born non-Hispanic white population. So let's just get this out of the way at the beginning. How do you know if you're part of the grading of America? There are 4 ways. Okay? Number 1, if you have difficulty seeing the screen. Number 2, if you have to go to the restroom twice during this presentation. And number 3, if you fall asleep during this presentation, it ain't my fault, your old college was probably Grading of America is about 3 things. It's about changes in longevity. It's about declining fertility. It's about a group of us born between 1946 and 1964 with the boomer population. Okay? Ladies and gentlemen, we're living much longer today than we ever anticipated in our history. In 1935, when we introduced Social Security in America, the average person turning 65 was going to live another 12.7 years. That same person turning 65 today is going to live another 18.7 years. And we now think living to 100 on a routine basis is well within reach. And there's one school of thought that says a person who will live to 130 has already been born. Why? Well, we got major medical advances that are going what? Extending our lives. You all are eating better some of the time. You all are exercising some of the time. And now we got this thing called regenerative medicine. We have a scientist in North Carolina, he regenerated a bladder. So your bladder, let's say, what color you want to be working on. And we're working on every body part at these longevity hotspots around the world where people are living. And this is the whole thing about this longevity economy. Google launched a company called Calico several years ago, where the whole purpose of the company is to defeat death by prolonging life. Big data mining, looking for relationships, disease etiologies, and the like, that we never had the capability of doing before we had the capability of big data and the like. Profound kind of changes in our society in terms of aging. We think there'll be well over 600,000 centenarians by 2050. Just seeing some new numbers extend that in 750 to 1 million range of people over 100 years old living in America. Why is this going on? Well, part of it is changes in fertility. Ladies, if you need to see how fertility has changed, you have to look at women 40 to 44 at the end of the fertility years, and I'm giving you a 30-year cycle. So if you look at women 40 to 44 in 1976, only about 10% of them were childless, didn't have any children at all. You fast forward 30 years, it goes from 10% to 20% had no children whatsoever, where you're not adding to the gene pool at the bottom if you're not having kids. And 1976, the average woman 40 to 44 had 3.1 kids. That's above replacement level. Fast forward 20 years, it dropped down to 1.9. That's below replacement level. If you're a couple, you need to have 2.1 kids to replace yourself, okay? That's not 0.1, you just gotta be rocking and rolling. So you're above replacement level. 59% of women 40 to 44 had 3 or more kids in 1976. It dropped down to 28% by 2006. Ladies and gentlemen, this room is a powerful statement of those numbers. Ladies, what happens when you all become educated and career-oriented in life? What happens at the age of marriage? Typically goes up, right? As the age of marriage goes up, what happens to the age of childbirth? The first child typically goes up. When those two things go up, what are you doing to childbearing years? You're strengthening them so it reduces or suppresses fertility. And when you suppress fertility at the lower end, the age structure does what? It goes up. And so it's a profound kind of change in our society because of the women's role in the economy and society. Now, I told you it takes 2.1 kids to replace yourself. If that's the case, who's replacing themselves in America?
Hispanic.
You got one group, ladies and gentlemen. You got one group. Non-Hispanic whites have a total fertility rate between 1.7 and 1.9 for 2 decades. Okay? Now, I'm a bit confused about this 0.7, 0.9 for the kid because I don't quite know how you get one. I've taught a few of them, but I don't understand. It takes 2.1 kids to replace yourself. You're not replacing yourself. If you build a wall around your country and keep everybody out, you got a slight problem. It's called future competitiveness of our nation. Then there's a group of us born between 1946 and 1964. Let me see a show of hands. 1946 and 1964. Some of y'all ain't got your hand up line, but it's all right. Those of us who have our hands up born between 1946 and 1964, part of post-World War II hormonal rush in America. It was our fathers who went off to World War II, came back home and got busy after the war. They got so busy that we produced 81 million of us. We are the boomer generation. On January 1st of 2011, the first baby boomer born in America turned 65 and became eligible for what?
Social Security, Medicare,
Everything.
everything.
Every day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year for the past 10 years. And for the next 10 years, we boomers will be turning 65 at the tune of 8,000 per day. That's every day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year for the past 10 years and for the next 10. That's the silver tsunami. That's the pig in the python marching out. Look at the data. We were 45 to 64 in 2010, 81 million people, about 20 million people moved into that age group range, 32% growth. You will note the second most rapidly growing population was the 65 plus population. Why? That person turns 65 is going to live what? Another 18.7 years, so you got that longevity thing going on there. Big pig in the python, boomer population, and the 65 plus population are living longer. We don't die, we just multiply. That's what the silver tsunami is all about. It's the aging thing. While the total population is growing about 10%, 15% growth in the 65 plus, 32% growth in the boomer population. That's the growth. Now, you gotta understand that when somebody tells you that Social Security is a pay-as-you-go system, you need to understand what that means. You are paying in now, but somebody else is spending your money.
Right.
In order for you to get some money out of it, what needs to be happening among that 25 to 44-year-old population?
They need to work it. Paying into it.
They need to be working every day.
Every day.
Everybody.
High-level job.
Hopefully job. But what happened to that population? It actually declined. It actually declined. Why would the 25 to 44-year-old population decline? Well, part of it is we have a baby bust. Stop having children with sufficient numbers. But the other part of it is that we missed is, ladies and gentlemen, some of the debilitating diseases that beset us boomers and pre-boomers later in life are now besetting Gen X and Gen Y earlier in life, leading to the early onset of death and disability. People being taken out in the prime of their lives. These are all people that we need to be healthy, working, and tax-paying, contributing to our system, but we're losing them to lifestyle kinds of factors like obesity, diabetes, violence, And probably the biggest one is the opioid crisis. That's what it looked like in 1999 across the country. That's 2014. 11,000 people hospitalized daily and about 100 deaths every day. Who are they? Prime working age people that we need to be doing what?
Working.
And paying to the system, leaving behind oftentimes orphan children that you see what? School systems walking into the school system, or grandparents who thought they were going off into the sunset for a nice retirement for portfolios now have their grandchildren to look after and take care of. Big deal. Understand the dynamic. That's how often we're aging. I just told you that 8,000 per day. This has enormous implications for everything that we do in society. Because what does it mean? For the first time in history, we now have 4 generations in the workplace, and next year it will be 5. Everybody from the pre-boom born in 1945 or earlier, and who's most familiar and in love with the rotary dial phone, to millennials who waltz into work at 10:30 in the morning with 2 buds in the ear whistling, and all us boomers who arrive at 5:30 in the morning. That's the way we roll. And the boomer looks at the millennial and says, look at that, that's a bad work ethic. I'm rolling up here at 10:30 in the morning. And the millennial takes the 2 buds out and looks at the boomer long enough to say, so you can't spell work ethic because I finished walking in the door what you've been neighbor gazing at since 5:30 this morning. And Mr. Pre-Boomer is still trying to get the first rotary dial call out for the day. And then there's you with an HR system that is a one-size-fits-all that's wreaking havoc and everything and costing more money than you ever thought about. 4 generations next year because Gen Z is about to turn 13. 5 generations all in the workplace with different values. You can see the number of people far right corner still in the workplace across those generations. That multi-generational workforce, but most of our HR systems, one size fits all, and all of this. So that means that a couple of things for the future of education, succession planning is one of the big things. 2 pieces to succession planning. Where's the next generation of talent going to come from? Fully recognizing that the next generation of talent, particularly leadership, can't look like the current generation. So how do you think about recruitment? And then how do you think about knowledge succession? You all been around the block a time or 2. Well, when you retire, what's going to happen to the knowledge that you accumulated? That's what happens. Also go with you, right? The real challenge is how to ensure succession to the next generation of things. The other issue, probably one of the biggest issues, child care won't be the biggest challenge for organizations in the future. It will be what?
Elder care.
And elder care is radically different from child care. Child care is actually quite predictable. You drop your crumb snatch off at the daycare in the morning, go pick them up in the afternoon. But if it's elder care, and in particular if you have a loved one with Alzheimer's or dementia, you're going to have to figure out how to squeeze work in. Everybody talks about work-life balance, we've thrown that out the door. It's going to be about work-life integration. And only about 30% of corporations have any accommodation for elder care in their HR process. And very few public sector organizations, but it's all consuming. Until 3 weeks ago, for the last decade, I had 3 siblings and myself. We had 8 family members between the ages over that time period of 87 and 99 that we were responsible for taking care of. The last 2 of them passed away in the last 3 weeks. One was 92, the other one was 99. Over the decade, I can tell you that some days I was afraid to pick up the phone. And even when you pick up the phone with your loved ones, they typically lie through their teeth. Not because they're dishonest people, but rather because of what? Proud people. They don't want to tell you the truth about anything. And so it's 10:30 at night. February, a couple of years ago, 30 degrees outside. My then 87-year-old uncle calls and says his heat's not working in his house. He lives an hour and a half from me. And he said, I must be out of oil. And I says, Uncle, you're not out of oil. I pay your oil bill. So that oil people come so afraid of me, they go hose when I ask for oil. He says, well, maybe the system is broken. I says, I doubt that. They replaced it 2 years earlier. And I just had a service right before Christmas because I didn't know anything else about it. But ladies and gentlemen, he was visually challenged, in a wheelchair, living alone at the time, and an older house. An older house The thermostat assumes to manipulate it, that you're standing upright and
Right.
at high level. But he's wheelchair bound, visually challenged by one of these little clips. What has he done, Victor? He has turned the thermostat off, but he can't see well enough to know that it's what? Off. It's 10:30 at night, 30 degrees outside. I got 8 o'clock class in the morning. There's an hour and a half away. I got to drive to the club.
Turn it
He
on.
said, why you call somebody in the neighborhood? You understand the neighborhood. That's healthcare. It will come, and it's all consuming, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of the kinds of things. And so this is a big thing that's going to transform everything that we do. Cooling water from grandma's well and grandma's too. Where am I? Oh, good. Cooling water from grandma's well and grandpa's too is about one of the most rapidly growing household types of the first decade of the new millennium. Grandparents raising grandchildren. Okay? All households with children grew by 3.8%. Households with just husband, wife, and their kids, no grandparents, grew by 1.4%. Households where both grandparents are present raising grandchildren grew by 42%. Grandmother only 9%. Grandfather only raising grandchildren grew by 28%. Almost 29. Now you're probably thinking about, your grandma, and my grandmother was 97 when she passed away. That means she almost had an AARP card when I was born. But you need to understand about these numbers. About half of these grandparents are between the ages of 13 and 15. What does that mean? Don't look all cross-eyed when one of your staff members at 31 years old walks up to you and say, I need time off this afternoon to go check on my wife.
Great.
I have a school that we built in North Carolina for vulnerable children. I have a 45-year-old great-grandmother at SECC. Now, there are some grandmothers like yours and mine. Grandma, 87 years old, can't get out of a rocking chair. 14-year-old granddaughter out cruising with the car. 10 o'clock at night looking for her 31-year-old boyfriend. I didn't think that one up. That's why it's happening in my own family. My wife and I took care of my mother-in-law for 8 years. We had a 14-year-old niece. Yeah. Now, I don't know about your state, North Carolina. We don't want 14-year-olds to drive. I don't think there's any state in America that we give 14-year-olds the freedom to go look for a third one. Y'all don't know, I like pinstripes, and I'm lucky that they ain't here going the wrong way. I got to get into that process. 10:30 at night, grandma can't get out of rec. Oh, by the way, grandma went to college at 17, 40-year career in public education as guidance counselor and a French teacher, but now can't get out of the rocking chair. That's what elder care is all about, and that's what this grandma thing is all about. And you know, I know this because of the school that I operate. You know, you can have a parent-teacher meeting with young grandparents and old grandparents in the room, up there showing a fancy slide like this. Half the people can't see it, the other half can't read it. And then there's you standing there trying to get educated. You don't know your population, folks. You can't do effective integration and mitigation in terms of child. So 2 things that undergird this that I worry a lot about is this one we're going to talk about really quickly. The end-to-end thesis and then the Entrepreneurship geographic disadvantage. In the men first. Good news first. Women are about to surpass men as the numerical majority in the paid workforce in America. In 2010, women constituted 49.8% of all paid workers. Women have been working all their lives. This is about paid workers. Okay? So that's the good news. Ladies and gentlemen, but this, ladies in particular, this is not because we decided to shoot y'all back. There's still a huge gender wage gap out there, right?
That's certainly
Yes.
82 to 83 cents on the dollar. Some people say 70-something cents on the dollar.
49 cents.
Okay. I learned a long time ago. Don't argue with Fine, but ladies and gentlemen, this reality is because men are doing so poorly in American society. All men. Look at it. Today, 3 times as many men of working age do not work at all compared to 1969. Why don't they work? Skills mismatches, disabilities, or what? Incarceration. Disability rate doubled between 1970 and 2009. Their wage rates dropped by $13,000 after control for inflation. But most telling for this, you and me, male college completion rates have barely changed over the last 35 years. The sex ratio in higher education has been 60% female, 40% male for a decade. 60% female, 40% male. I assure you at birth, the sex ratio is not what? 60-40. It's more like what? 50-50. Where are the men? We granted 572,000 more degrees to women than we did men in higher education in 2010. I don't have your school district, but I'll show you your university system, I'll show you mine. The UNC system, 220,000 students, is 43% male. The predominantly white institutions are 45% male. The minority serving and historically black colleges are 36% male. Our community colleges are 44% male. We had one school a couple of years ago that was 80-20. 80% female, 20% male. Where are the men? Where are the boys? Understand, ladies and gentlemen, that you can't have stable family, stable community, stable anything with that kind of sex ratio and balance in terms of the things that we're trying to do. I think there's a clue to it, and it rests with the triple whammy of geographic disadvantage. This concept exists at the intersection of the browning of America on the one hand and the graying of America. It's the dynamic interaction of those two. Let me develop it for you. I'll give you a racial topology of U.S. counties first. Those are racial generation gap counties. What does that mean? The adult voting age population in these counties are predominantly white, aging, empty nesters. But the school age population is predominantly non-white. What kind of support for public education do you get? Because I ain't got no dog in K-12 education fight. I'm most concerned about crime, safety, and retirement amenities, and they typically go to separate. Those are majority minority counties. The adult voting age population is predominantly non-white, school age population is predominantly non-white. Lots of interest in public education. They're all low-wealth counties, not enough money, tax base to ensure kids a high-quality education. The rest of the counties, the gray are majority counties. The adult voting age population is predominantly white, school age population is predominantly white. But in those counties, about a fifth of the kids who go to school in those counties are kids of color. But if you peer beneath the veneer, and look and ask where those kids of color are in those counties, they're either in racially isolated schools within those districts or in the quote-unquote good schools. They're highly underrepresented in the college prep charts, honors, AP, IB. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, I paint a picture where the new majority moving forward are going to be people of color. And those kids are a lot in a hard place in the demographically different kinds of changes that are going on. That's whammy number one. Whammy number two is at the neighborhood level. Those neighborhoods right there are 60% or more non-Hispanic white. Those neighborhoods are 60% or more non-white. And the yellow neighborhoods are transitioning from white to non-white. We call that hyper-segregation, separate and unequal, and it probably rivals the segregation that existed in the year 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education, in the year whammy number two. Whammy number three, school-age poverty. Those neighborhoods right there, 40% or more of the kids that walk into school don't come from households with incomes below poverty line. Between 25 and 39% of those kids come from those households. Those two groups put together, we call that concentrated poverty. The yellow, poverty rates below 25%, we call that concentrated affluence. Ladies and gentlemen, the average kid increasingly that walks in a public school door today comes from these situations, some combination of these situations. How many? All three of those things, 9.8 million kids. That's 93% non-white. Two of those things, say hypersegregation, concentrated poverty, about 12 million kids. That population is 81% non-white. For kids that have one of those whammies, about 20 million kids, 39% non-white. No whammy at all, 32 million kids, 24% non-white there. Where's the growth? Where's your competitive? It's going to be at the top, not the bottom, in terms of the kind of changes. That's our challenge moving forward. I wish it ended there, but those are food deserts. That's food insecurity right there. I have a school in Durham, North Carolina, which is highly ranked as all that in the bag of chips plus a dip on every attractive indicator. And I was at the school one day, at the end of the day, waiting for parents to pick up their kids, and had a little conversation with three little girls, and made a mistake of asking one of the girls, "What did you have for dinner last night?" She looked at me and said, "Last night was not my turn to eat." She says, "At our house, we rotate who gets to eat dinner, and I get to eat every third night." I I'm not talking about some rural county or some emerging market society. I'm talking about research triangle, one of the most innovative regions in the world. You got kids who get to eat every Thursday night. What kind of learning goes on in those kind of situations? So food deserts, food insecurity, big issue. Disciplinary sanctions. 3 million kids suspended from school annually, and 250,000 of them referred to the police for misdemeanor charges as early as the first grade. Ladies and gentlemen, you get a misdemeanor charge, it follows you the rest of your life. Those are black kids, and those are the Latino kids. And this blew my mind. We're working for a group of low performance schools in North Carolina. We have to take end of course tests. And this is a graphic of who's in the room to take the end of course test. The blue line is for males, the red line is for females. You will note a slight sex ratio imbalance in who's taking the test. Where are the boys? Where are the boys? Suspended, all those kind of things. But I was blown away when I spoke to a group of school leaders who were very honest with me. And they said that there's some school administrators who will tell their boys, don't come to school the day of the test. And they can't have them screwing up.
The test.
It ain't hard to figure out where those boys are. And what do you get when that happens? This is, I'm going to say this, because I know I'm over my time.
No, because you're cheating.
Oh, okay, well, I have bad sense of time, so that's why I'm asking. Okay, that's why I'm going to be respectful. So what do you get when this happens? This is an enrollment projection study we did for a major urban school district. It produces about 6,000 graduates every year, about 1,500 of them go to community college. Of that 1,500, the blue line is the percentage of kids who are college ready. They don't need any remedial courses at all, about 25%. The red line is the percent of those kids who need one remedial course, and the green line, they need 2 or more remedial courses. Okay? These are all graduates now. I'm not talking about the ones who fell out. 71% of these kids across that time period couldn't pass developmental level math 1. Only 7% of the 71% ever made it to the starting line of college level math. They got frustrated about that, spent all their money, whatever, but they didn't make it. Now, those are the ones that graduated. See, ladies and gentlemen, that's why you got to reframe these equity issues as competitiveness issues. You can't compete if you don't have the talent to do the work. And it's not that these kids aren't talented, it's the structure that they're operating in that we need to fix in order to make these things happen. And part of that fixing, I'm just stunned. I got homeless teachers at my school. Homeless teachers. The dark black line is the amount of money you need to live in Durham. Okay? The blue line is how much they make. Okay? You will note that there are only a couple of people in that school who are even close to what's called self-sufficiency standard. They can cover basic necessities. Most people can't cover basic necessities today on their teacher side. I'll give you 3 examples really quickly. So, one teacher at the top, she has 4 kids of her own. She makes about $46,000 a year. To be self-sufficient in Durham, she needs to make $97,000 a year. That's just basic necessity, because there's nothing in downtown Durham today less than $1,100 a month rent, okay? And no house under $1 million. Okay? That's just the way these markets are changing. Then my IT person, he has 2 kids in the school and an infant. He makes $40,000. He needs $86,000 for his family. So he has a deficiency, wage deficiency, $43,000. Then I have a teaching assistant. She has 1 kid. She's a single parent. Hers is about $14,000. Gap between $30,000 and $40,000. How are you going to have a quality education with people? Now, they're not homeless in the sense of standing on the street, they're couch surfers. Or they're renting a hotel room on a weekly basis. When you don't know where you're going to stay, your kids and all of that,
I mean, we gotta fix this problem if you gotta put it all together. And it's depressing. I mean, I spend most of my time trying to sustain folk and, raise money and augment their salaries and the like because they can't. That's not basic. I'm not talking about an exact exuberant kind of living. I'm the basic necessity of housing, food, and things of that nature that you have to do. We'll talk about that later. So, ladies and gentlemen, we got to figure out how we manage this transition from the grade of America to the brown of America. And we have to be eloquent with an elevator pitch of why this is important. No babbling, cut to the chase. We're going to lose our competitiveness and grow the marketplace if we don't fix this. Because competition for talent is going to be fierce and it's going to be global. I teach at an international business school, we're a top 20 business school, and our students from India tell us they don't break a sweat in our MBA program. They say their high schools are more rigorous than our MBA programs. Hurt my feelings. But just think about that for a moment. Their high school is more rigorous than a top 20 business school education. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't see how we compete if we don't embrace influence. We're an aging nation. We're going to need the talent to propel our nation and to move us forward. And I don't think we're going to survive, thrive if we don't figure out how to address what's often called the baby sons problem, the problem with our male kids, children. Everything will do that. Say, be eloquent about making that case. We got to make sure that the private sector is actively engaged in K-12 education to ensure that training is aligned with skills required for the new world of work. Right now, I think there's a huge misalignment. When employers want people who can move on ambiguity, it's more than reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's another place. And I think successful recruitment and retention is going to hinge on your ability to effectively manage the full nexus of diversity issues in terms of the quality of the staff and talent to educate kids. Are you all familiar with the iceberg model of diversity? Here you are. You know you only see about 30% of an iceberg. And that's the equivalent of what you see in terms of diversity. All those things up at the top. Race, gender, physical disability, those are things you can see. It's all of those things that matter. All those things that matter. See, looking at me, you wouldn't know that I lost 10 family members in the last decade, including my spouse for 4 years. That shapes who I am. Yeah, that shapes who I am. Lots of other things you don't know because it's not the visible stuff. It's all of the other stuff that matters. Building a world-class education system is about not just what you see. It's about all those things you don't see and figuring out how do you get a handle on them. And the same thing applies for the kids that we work with. See, ladies and gentlemen, I have a beef. We gotta stop telling kids who come from poor backgrounds everything is wrong with you and I'm gonna fix it. But you know what? Everything ain't wrong with you. That's right. You all are educated people. There's some neighborhoods I could drop you all off in. You're dumb as a nail. And those kids navigate those environments. See, ladies and gentlemen, the key to success in this society is having the ability to code switch. Change your behavioral norms depending upon the situational context you find yourself in. The ability to move from the streets to the suites without missing a beat. And that's a global skill. See, you can't go to Bangkok, Thailand and do business the same way you do it in the United States.
Likewise, the rules and codes of the street are radically different from the code of the suites. And what you want to be able to do, not one or the other, is have the cultural elasticity to do all of that. And my experience has been, when you get kids to understand that that's a valuable skill set, it is on. It's on. Because all of a sudden, you're recognizing and acknowledging what? Have some skills. And that means the difference between success and failure and life and death in one setting. Okay? So the goal is to connect the dots. Connect the dots. But once you get kids to understand that they have that capability, the cultural elasticity skill sets. At our school, we say deficit models are out, successful pathways are in. What constitutes success out of these environments, not focusing on what? Failure. Because you see, when you look at these neighborhoods we're talking about, not every kid ends up a failure. Some of them succeed against the odds. Our crucial question is what distinguishes success from failure, and then let's build on success. I'm tired. I can't tell time.
It's perfect
I'm
time.
tired. I'm ready for whiskey. Do we have time for questions at this point? Or how you, I don't want that. 8 minutes. Well, in that case,
Oh, no, 5.
questions.
Sorry, 5.
Now, see, she just took 3 of them. She said we got 5 minutes. I'm happy to entertain questions if you want. I've said anything that piques their interest. My ego ain't involved. If you don't, it's fine. This next guy.
I was wondering if you could go back to the triple whammy slide. You were talking so fast. I couldn't think as fast as you were talking.
Well, that's about your age. That ain't about
And since I didn't even get to raise my hand when you asked who was a baby boomer, I mean, there's a lot of us. There's a lot of us who might want to see that again.
The triple whammy?
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
You need this.
Okay.
The one that has where you have the numbers laid out.
Oh, the table?
Yeah,
Okay.
and could you talk through that again?
Yeah. For $200.
Yep, right there.
So the 9.8 million kids are growing up in a county that there's either little political and financial support. They're in a neighborhood that is hyper-segregated and they're from a concentrated poverty household. The two things, it could be any two of those combinations of 3 things.
Repeat them. Hypersegregation.
Hypersegregation, concentrated poverty, and then a racial generation gap, or a county where there's little political or financial support for the education. Locked into the gray and brown of America. Did they get the paper, Dr. Causey-Konate?
Not yet.
She's going to send you a paper with right, Dr.?
I sent it to all of your peers who will
Oh.
be with us today.
Send it to these folks. There's a paper with let's start. Like me running folks' business.
Dr. Johnson,
Yes, ma'am.
can you tell us a little bit about your school? You've referenced it several times.
Yeah, so we have a school called Global Scholars Academy in Durham, North Carolina. It's a K-8 laboratory school, which is a beta test site for new ideas and innovations for how you educate vulnerable kids. It's a public charter school, which means that we have a lottery for the slots. So it's a built-in natural experience. There's some kids that get in, other kids that don't, and it's unfortunate that you have to use that language, but we want to isolate the impacts of the things that we do. So we're an extended day, year-round school. We start at 7 o'clock, it's 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, we go to 6 p.m. daily. We're 190 days. We never close during intersections because our kids have no place to go. They don't have food in their life. We guarantee kids 4 things at our school: protection, affection, correction, and connections. And that's all tied to all the big critical theories about what is going on in public education and what you need to do to fix it. We partner with a church that invested $10 million to build the school. It has it's 48,000 square foot facility, upper school, lower school, 12,000 square foot gymnasium with a walking track. It has a fitness center. It has a music and dance studio. It has an urban garden. It has 2 age-appropriate playgrounds for a 5-star early childhood learning center, and then K2 for our kids at the school. It focuses on success, not failure. We teach Mandarin Chinese beginning in kindergarten. And I assure you, if you come to visit and you give me ample warning that you come, there will be some kid, probably your 1st or 2nd grader, who will welcome you to the school. He will be assigned to you, and he will know all, or she will know all your business before you get there. Because that's what it's all about, the kinds of competitive intelligence that you need to thrive and prosper. So our U.S. Senator Burr came to visit the school, and we assigned a little 2nd grader to host him. So when Senator Burr walked into the school, a kid walked her and welcomed Senator Burr in Mandarin Chinese, translated it into English, and said, welcome to Global Scholars Academy, how may I help you? And Senator Burr proceeded to tell him that he was the senator representing the district. The kid interrupted him and says, I know who you are. He said, you went to Wake Forest, right? Senator Burr said, yes. He said, you played football there, right? Okay. So you were a lineman, right? Senator Burr said, yes. The kid looked at him and said, you must not have been very good because you wasn't a quarterback or a running back. So we prepare kids to be globally ready. It's extended day year-round, so we have a set of extended day activities around career options that are going to be being moving forward. We have one on cybersecurity, forensic accounting, food systems, and a range of others. And we do something called the GSA Entrepreneurial Startup every year, where our kids, students from our MBA program, work with the kids on their venture ideas. And they have a venture competition at the end of every year where there's actually an award for kids. See, we got to stop putting kids in a box, and when they don't fit, say they got attention deficit disorder. The most creative people have attention deficit disorder. They drive you crazy because they're going to move on to the next thing. And so we always say at GSA, we celebrate the thrill of discovery, and we are a place where kids can think crazy thoughts. 9 out of 10 of them may be bona fide crazy, but one of them may be the next revolution that does what? Transform. That's the way innovation works. And so we create a safe haven for kids in our community, and we connect them with what is called bridging social capital, what Bob Tucker calls bridging social capital. It's not your strong ties that matter, but rather it's the strength of your weak ties. The more diverse your networks are, the more geographically expansive they are, the better off you are. So we built around successful pathways theory, oppositional culture theory, resiliency theory, and a whole range of other things to make things happen.
Your achievement data. We'll talk about that.
We just had one kid this year earn a $57,000 scholarship to one of the most prestigious boarding schools in America. And so I'm not going to say that we're knocking it out of the park. The reason that I'm not going to say that is because every day there's a new challenge. Our biggest challenge today is what I call policy-induced trauma. Just had a Latino parent walk into the school and tell the head of school, let me tell you how to handle my kid today if I don't show up to pick them up. What school of education prepares any administrator to respond to that? But better yet, what kid is going to learn anything that day when you don't know whether your mom or your dad is going to show up to pick you up? That's policy-induced trauma. And so we got challenges every day, but we're making progress with now we have every year a lot of parents who have exceptional children who don't like the school systems that they're in. So we get a lot of those coming in, which raises the cost of what we do. We're committed. The other thing that I will tell you quickly is a lot of charter schools that have lotteries. You're supposed to have a lottery, every kid have equal access. A lot of schools will engage in post-lottery screening, where they screen out the kids that they really don't want. Up to about 55% of the kids in some instances. Now, think about this for a moment, ladies and gentlemen. You won the lottery. And if there's one thing fixed income people know about is the lottery. You won the lottery, and then somebody tells you they changed the game after. We don't do that. If you get in, we take you. You got to have serious, extreme, exceptional needs that we can't serve you with. But that adds to the cost, and it impacts your. And so for us, it's about progress. So we try. For 2 years in a row now, we've made substantial progress. We've been recognized for what we're doing. But it's hard work, folks, and it costs a lot of money. We're a $3.5 million a year operation. We get 60% of it from the state feds.
But you're doing something.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's why I used to be 6'5" and good looking. You see where I am.
But you're putting your hands in.
You are, but ladies and gentlemen, it's not for the faint of heart. But when you have to raise 40% every year just to keep kids going, I mean, it shouldn't be. This is the next generation of talent that's got to prepare our nation. But if you're committed to it, that's what you have to do. I feel good some days. Other days I go home and get under the bed. Don't come out the next day because it's just that tough. When you got a homeless teacher with 4 kids and she doesn't know where she's going to be tonight, and you expect her to show up bright eyed and bushy tailed every day to do what? And you don't know that until you get there every day and deal with it. So it's a moving target kind of thing, you know, and then you got it's something else because that's the nature of the landscape. And I think the more we have the power of those kinds of stories to tell people who are in policy making, it's got to make it real to folk. And I think that's the other piece of it for me. Yes, ma'am.
I think we see that there's probably an increasing number of schools, or I hope that are looking to do the kind of cultural elasticity, cultural competency in their classrooms and their leaders. But I feel like I don't see a lot of. You just described a great example. I feel like the examples are really what's lacking. So what does that look like? How does that look like? And then also the training and preparation for teachers and leaders to get them into a place where they can provide that kind of education. I think, and I wonder if you have some examples beyond your school of what that looks like, or places that are doing a good job preparing teachers and leaders to do that kind of work.
So the other thing that I have is a K-12 Innovation Idea Lab that has the leading thinkers and doers at Carolina, Duke, and a number of other higher education institutions around the country. That's what we do, is think about these kinds of innovations and the like. And so that program on protection, affection, correction, and connection people to train people around the country. The trainers in our sector, we're doing some of that. I'm a bit dubious in some settings when people say that they're moving. For me, you got to be playing fair with kids. If you're bringing kids in and then pushing one back, you don't want to, that's playing fair. I don't think that's fair to all those kids. So I want to work with places that are playing fair, so we need to build a education system for at least the moment, not for the best. And so we're kind of selective kinds of things that we do, but we do hopefully with this school, the way we're running it, we can come up with what I call a franchisable model of public education success. Do these things that really matters. I think people are getting moved on this, so I appreciate you all.